since we missed a day, I'm trying to figure out how to skip around and cover all this stuff, so I'm going to start on page 231 today, where on the chapter of living with a teenager, somebody writes in and says, I don't believe kids are as easily influenced as you say. What they see does not necessarily determine how they will behave. And Dr. Dobson says, there was a film entitled E.T., the Extraterrestrial. Do any of you remember that film? Well, look what he says about it. Got you, Jax.
Thank you.
He says that in one scene in that film, this little space critter is eating Reese's Pieces, and during the month when that movie was being shown, the sale of Reese's Pieces went through the ceiling. And he said, isn't that a clear example of a movie's influence on a child's thinking? And it's just like, so what makes you think it's limited to Reese's Pieces? That we just need to recognize that the entertainment industry has a great hold on people's minds. And I found when some people felt sorry for us and gave us a TV and we started watching them with our children, I was pretty amazed. Got you, Rachel? I was pretty amazed at how my children I guess it's because you see it, you hear it, the music captivates you. I guess it's because the TV program was just so designed to just suck you into it, that here were these two little girls that were pretty discerning people, and they would watch this stuff, and then I would say, wait a minute, what just happened? And they would go, yeah, Dad, that doesn't make any sense. And it was almost like I needed to help them do kind of a check on, has this little TV program taken over our minds and our ability to think and make judgments? Gotcha, Quiz. So I think you just need to let yourself be aware of the influence that the media can have on us. My wife loves baseball, and we'd go to a baseball game once in a while, and we get in the car driving home, and she's humming the beer commercial. And I'm going, what are you singing? And she goes, I can't believe that. Just because it was a catchy little tune, and it would catch her attention, and she would carry it with her. And what we often don't realize is the refrains of those tunes are carried with us as well. And you have to make a deliberate effort to say, I'm going to be discerning. Now, I make a deliberate effort to do that, and then here's what my dear wife says to me. Tom, don't be so critical. But there used to be a billboard. When I lived over near Loma Vista, there was a billboard on the highway, right next to Grandview. I'm driving down the road, and here's this lady reclining in a black velvet dress. And that's all you can see at a distance is this beautiful lady reclining on a billboard. And you go, what are they advertising? Then when you get up close, she's holding a bottle of black velvet. Now, does that sound like perfume? It doesn't. Wouldn't you think that's what the lady would be advertising? It was an alcoholic beverage. She was advertising whiskey. Now, can you tell me what in the world does that picture have to do with drinking whiskey? I mean, what they ought to do is make scratch and sniff so you can smell the stuff and say, if it tastes like it smells, I don't want it. I mean, Or they ought to have, on the billboard, they ought to have a picture of an alcoholic who's got a bottle of it in his hand, who's lost his family and his job and everything else because he's sucking on this alcohol stuff, pickling his brain, and he's been captivated by it and it's messed his life up. Wouldn't that be true advertising? Say, here's where you can be someday if you keep drinking this stuff. But I'm just telling you that the world around you does all kinds of things to try to influence you to do the worldly thing. And what does the Bible say? Broad is the way that leads to destruction, and narrow is the way that leads to eternal life. So I think probably if you have to err on the side of being a little too critical rather than just following the crowd. But the fact that somebody said, I don't think they're that easily influenced, tells you that there's some people who haven't thought this stuff through. Okay, that was number 281. Let's jump over to page 237 for 288. Someone said, give me your short answer, Dr. Dobson, to the question, how can I best survive the tumultuous years of my 3 teenagers? Can you imagine having 3 teenagers in your house all at the same time? Well, here's what Dr. Dobson says. Keep the family schedule simple. Don't get things too complicated. Get plenty of rest for you and the teenagers. Eat nutritious meals. Isn't that something, how that dovetails with the other book that talked about all the things that are necessary during the teenage years about enough rest and proper nutrition? And keep your teenager involved in non-stop wholesome activities. Why would anyone recommend keep your teenagers involved in non-stop wholesome activities? What is one thing that characterizes teenagers? They get bored quickly. They want to do something. No, all that stuff you want to do just leads to trouble. Let's just sit at home and do nothing. No, when you have teenagers, you better get involved in wholesome activities, or there'll be lots of other people seeking to drag them into unwholesome activities. And that's true in your family. That's true in your church. That's true any place you work with teenagers. Keep them busy doing wholesome things. And may I suggest that there's a lot of teenagers who don't know what kind of wholesome opportunities are out there because they've only been bombarded by a secular media, and you need to start to teach them how to do that. When I talked earlier about how the youth pastor would bring the kids over to our house because we were glad to have them, but we wanted to have our own teenagers' peers there so we could get to know them better. But my wife has all of these table games. Anyone know what I'm talking about? Any of you have table games at home? She would pull those things out and put them on different tables, and then she would let people play a game for a while just to introduce them to it. And about the time you learned how to play the game, you had to get up and change and go to another table and play a different game. The idea was she was just trying to introduce some of these kids to some of these fun games we played at home. Do any of you have any fun, wholesome, fun games to play?
Sorry.
Sorry?
Though I don't know how wholesome. We get pretty competitive.
All right, but it's like, it's just that, yeah, I'm thinking of one like that called Pit. I've seen some people in my family get a little worked up about it. If someone doesn't trade me 2 of these, I'm going to... any others? The rest of you don't play games? Wholesome table games? What?
I like the game of Clue.
Clue. Okay, Clue.
That's a good one. Very good.
The rest of you don't have any.
What about like Monopoly and stuff?
Monopoly, yeah. Monopoly.
Uno.
What? Uno.
Dutch Blitz.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm just telling you. See, think of some of these wholesome games that you can introduce adolescents to. Any others? Scrabble? Anybody like Scrabble?
Love Scrabble.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like, find those games. And the reason I think you want to have a good variety of them, when you're introducing teenagers to some of these wholesome activities, they might not all like the same thing, but have enough of a variety there where everybody can find something they can really enjoy. And it just means you go out and buy some of these things. You say, yeah, but some of those can be pretty expensive. Okay, here we are again. We can either take the cheap route and just let unwholesome stuff happen, or we can spend a little money and for a more wholesome environment. It's the same with eating, isn't it? You can either eat healthy or eat cheap and get a lot of junk food. And then the last thing Dr. Dobson says on page 237 for question 288 is stay on your knees. Why do you think, what's he talking about when he says stay on your knees? Be praying. Be praying for these children. Constantly praying for them. When they, do any of you remember taking your test and getting your permit to drive? And your parents were shocked because they were sure you had failed the test and you didn't. And so now someone has to get in the car and ride with you when you have no idea what you're doing. You don't remember that? And then once you got your license and you were allowed legally in this country to get in the car and take off and drive down the driveway, back out and leave and wave goodbye to all of us because you're on your own. Do you understand that parents are on their knees the whole time you're gone, just praying that you get home safely at the end of your little excursion? And you're so pumped. And I'm just saying that you need to be praying for these kids, praying for them. The ones in your family, the ones you work with in ministry, just keep praying that God will just put a hedge around them, that God will help them, that God will keep them safe, that God will give you wisdom on how to help them and relate to them. Okay, that's number 288. Let's jump over to page 246 to number 300. Yeah, I know, we've got to keep moving here, so we're going to skip some. Generally speaking, what kind of discipline do you use with a teenager who's just miserable to live with? Well, the question might be, how did they get to be such a miserable person to live with? Somebody allowed it. And now it's gotten so bad. Well, I thought they would grow out of it. Oh? You let a person behave in a miserable way, and they won't eventually grow out of it. They'll just keep getting worse and worse. So somewhere you have to say, I'm going to intervene. And what does that guy on Barney Fife say? What does Barney Fife say? Nip it in the bud. Nip it in the bud. Get this stuff early. Well, now that you've let it go for a while and it's become a habit, it's going to take some time to turn things around. And I like what Dr. Dobson says on number 6. He gives some good suggestions here, but number 6 on page 247. Remember, you as the parent have the car that the teenager needs, the money that he covets, the authority to grant or withhold privileges. If push comes to shove, you can use these chips to exchange for commitments to be more responsible in life. And I think there again, here's where it seems like in modern families, there's such an inclination to say, oh, I just want to give them everything they want, and that'll somehow, they'll grow up to be responsible adults and love me for the rest of their lives. And it just doesn't work out like that. They need someone to help them become a responsible person. And you've got the power. You've got the power to do that. That was number 300. Let's turn over to page 254 for number 307.
Dr. Bona, did you start the video?
What?
You did start it. Right?
Yeah,
Okay,
I've
just
got it
making
going.
Sure.
Yeah, I do. Thank you for checking those. Number 307, page 254. Why do you think so many parents are reluctant to let their kids go after they're grown? Have you ever wondered that? Why are my parents having such a hard time accepting the fact that I'm a young adult and I can live on my own? Well, maybe they haven't told you this, but did you know that parents fear that their children aren't ready to stand on their own, and they worry about what will happen to them, and they want to protect them as long as they can? We care passionately about our kids, Dr. Dobson says on page 254, and would do anything to meet their needs. But we're among the worst when it comes to letting go of our grown sons and daughters. In fact, those two characteristics are linked. The same commitment that leads us to do so well when the children are small, dedication, love, concern, and involvement, also causes us to hold too tightly when they're growing up. I will admit my own difficulties in this area, Dr. Dobson says. Now, however, I relate to my grown children as adults, and I find this an exciting and rewarding era. Oh, there's time for everything, Solomon wrote. There's also a time for everything to end. Oh, what did he do in between? I finally understood the importance of turning loose before our kids were born. I wrote extensively on the subject when they were still young. I prepared a film series about it. And when it came time to open my hand and let the birds fly, I struggled with doing it with my own children because they're so dear to me. I love the experience of fatherhood, and I was not ready to give it up. So does that help you be a little understanding about your parents? If we weren't so strongly bonded with our children, it would be easier to let them go. But if you have strong bonds with your children, then it's just going to be tougher, even though you know all the right things to do, to let them go later on. And just, again, ask God to help you do that. And we do want to protect them from all the pains in life, but what does that little athletic phrase say? No pain, what? No gain. You learn from your mistakes. And I'm thinking it's better to learn from small mistakes than to wait and be protected to where when you're finally out on your own, you make a huge, big mistake. Have any of you ever wanted something so bad that you worked hard to earn some money, and then you got some money together and you purchased it, and you later, it was kind of a disappointment, and you thought about all the hours you spent earning money and how you spent it on that, and then it broke, or it wasn't as satisfying as you thought it would be? Well, it's better to learn that with a small expenditure earlier in life than to wait till you're on your own. You're in college, everybody's sending you credit cards, and you just go out and buy a whole bunch of stuff and run up a $3,000 debt. You understand? Now you've got a big problem on your hand. So it's probably better to learn some of these lessons earlier in life about how many hours you have to work to pay for something. I took my granddaughter, did I tell you I took her out to Olive Gardens to eat for lunch, and after we finished, I told her how many hours her brother would have to work to take her out to that same restaurant to eat. And she said, I don't think my brother would ever take me out to that restaurant. I said, no, but maybe someday some guy will want to do that, and you need to remember how many hours he had to work to pay for it. I mean, that's a lot of hours. But if you work for minimum wage, what do you bring home? $6 an hour is your take-home pay, or $5 or something like that? Or is it more than that now? Is it $8?
I think it's $7.85.
How much?
$7.85.
So that's the wage. And so they take about, what, 80 cents of it, so you're left with $7, or maybe they take more than that out of it. You're left with $7. That means if you're going to go to a restaurant, that's going to charge $50 for a meal, you're going to have to work 7 hours to pay for that one dinner experience. I'm thinking I'm going to the grocery store and buy some Alfredo sauce and some noodles and some chicken and make my own chicken Alfredo. Okay. Number 309. Our 21-year-old daughter came home from college and moved back into her old bedroom. Now, 3 years later, she's still there. She doesn't work. She doesn't have any ambition. Doesn't know what she's going to do with her life. She seems perfectly content to freeload. Freeload? What do you mean freeload? I'm a member of this family. Why would they call me a freeloader? Because the rest of us are doing things to sustain this family, and you're not. You're freeloading. I know she ought to get on with her life, but what can I do? I can't just force her out, can I? And what does Dr. Dobson tell this parent to do? There comes a time when you must gently but forthrightly hand the reins over to your adult daughter and force her to stand on her own. I think it's time to help her pack. Give a shove to a 24-year-old woman may seem cruel at the time, but I encourage you to consider emancipating her. The parental gravy train probably should go around the bend. If that never happens, lasting characteristics of dependency and immaturity may ensue. Now, here's what I would say. You say, that's a pretty painful thing to do, yeah? Well, you can either experience the pain now, or you can be paying the bills for this person as they get older, and eventually you get too old to work and have any money, and you don't have anyone there watching out for you. I mean, that used to be the way the world worked. You raised children to be responsible adults so that when you were too old to work, they would take care. You took care of them, so they take care of you. And if you want that to happen down the road, he said, Dr. Dobson says on page 255, I suggest you sit down and talk to your daughter, explaining why the time has come for her to make a life of her own. Set a deadline, perhaps 2 or 3 weeks, and begin preparing for it. Then give her a big hug, a promise of prayer, and send her on her way. I've had 2 occasions to deal with this kind of thing, not with my own daughters, but one was with my mom's sister. She moved to Kansas City to live with us till she could start a life up here, and she just stayed too long. And I finally said to her one day, I said, Aunt Margie, I think I know why you haven't found a place yet. She said, why? I said, because you're too picky and you're comfortable living here where we pay all the bills. So guess what? I told her this on a Monday. I said, you have all week to find a place to live. If you don't find one by Friday, on Saturday, I will go find one for you. Guess what my Aunt Margie did? She did not want me picking her place to live, so she found a place to live. The other occasion was a niece came to live with us. Parents lived out of town and asked if they could stay at our house while they get settled in Kansas City, because Kansas City is a good work market. I said, sure. And they moved in and had difficulty following all of our house rules. And I finally said, I said, I think you're not looking hard enough for a job. And she said, I have to have a car before I can get a job. I said, no, you don't. I said, just find a job within walking distance of our house. There's a whole bunch of places where you could work. She goes, I don't want to work there. I said, so where do you want to work? She said, I want to work at this mall over here, at the Mall of the Great Plains or something. I said, fine, you go over there and get a job, and while you're getting a job, I'll find an apartment complex close by where you can walk to work, and I'll go in and make the down payment to help you get an apartment, and then you make the payment, you pay the rent when you get your paycheck. I mean, You just have to sometimes intervene and help people. And she got the job. And the guy called me and said she didn't pay the rent. I'm going, why are you calling me? I don't live in the apartment. Call her. He said, she won't respond to my calls. I said, well, then put her stuff out of the, what do you do when you evict somebody? And so he said, well, do you want me to do that? And I said, no, but I said, are you going to let her live there free? He said, no. I said, well, then do what you have to do and she'll learn the hard way. And by then, she had lived there long enough to make enough money to buy a car, which doesn't take much in this day and age. And she just decided that she was going to spend her money on stuff she wanted and not pay her rent and see what would happen. She found out what would happen. Any idea where she had to live for a little while after she got put out of her apartment? Where would you live? In your car. Have any of you ever lived in your car? Well, it's not the best place in the world to live, but it's better than living under a bridge. And it's where you have to live if you don't pay your bills. And if you don't make your car payment, you won't have a car to live in either. I mean, somewhere, don't we all have to somewhere grow up? Dr. Dobson talks about that in this chapter on, he calls it advice to young adults. Number 311. I'm 22 years old and I'm still living at home. It's driving me nuts. My folks are in my face every day. They want me to get a full-time job because I only work part-time at a gas station. Why can't they get off my case and leave me alone? Now, what's the real question to ask here? If you don't want your parents on your case, what should you consider doing? Get a full-time job and find your own place to live. If you're going to live here and they're going to pay the bills, well, they're my parents. Yeah, well, they're your parents, so that means they ought to be on your case about growing up and becoming responsible. And Dr. Dawson says, I think it's time for you to pack. The way you live probably irritates your parents. When things deteriorate to that point, it's time for you to get out. Number 312 on 257, I'm 21 and I still live at home. I'm very comfortable there, and since I'm not going with anyone, I plan to stay with my parents for a long time. Why not? Tell me why you think it's unwise to go on living where it's cheaper and easier than getting out on your own. Well, there are situations when it makes sense to live with your parents for a long time, and maybe yours is one of them. I would caution you, however, not to overstay your welcome. That would not be in your best interest or the best interest of your parents. I mean, if they're glad to have you live there and if they have accommodations, but if you're going to live there, don't you think it would be a good idea as a young adult to kind of learn to start paying the rent, buying groceries, learning how to pay utilities, just understanding what that's all about? I still remember when one of my daughters had a job when she got out of high school, working in a clothing store, and they had made her the manager of the store. And so all the girls who worked under her said, where do you live? And she said, I live at home with my parents. They thought, you live with your parents? You're the manager here and you live with your parents? And she said, Dad, it does sound kind of strange. She said, so I'm going to get my own place to live. I said, okay, you've got a good job. You could pay for it. She started checking out apartment complexes and she found one. And I said, what are you going to pay for rent there? And she told me, and I said, you know, girl, if you want to pay that much in rent, you can. But if you're going to spend that kind of money, you could probably buy a house for that kind of money. She goes, no way. I said, yeah. She said, well, it wouldn't be much of a house. And I said, well, let's drive around and I'll show you some houses that you could buy for that kind of money. And she goes, oh, wow, I didn't realize that. So she says, okay, maybe I'll go buy a house. And I still remember when she moved in and she thought, I'm making a house payment. And she goes, what is this from KCP&L? What is that? That's a bill for the electricity. If you don't pay it, they turn the lights off. What is this from MGE, Missouri Gas? Oh, they turn your furnace off if you don't pay that one, and you can't cook on your gas stove. What is this bill from Kansas City for water? That's the water that comes into your house that you use. You don't pay that bill, and they turn your water off. She goes, how many of these bills am I going to get in my life? I said, well, are you ready for this? Since you have a mortgage on your house, you're going to get a bill every year for what? Insurance. Because the guy who owns more of the house than you do wants to know if it burns down, is he going to get paid? So he's going to make you buy insurance. And, oh, I forgot to tell you this one. And at the end of the year, you have to pay taxes on the house. What? You have to pay the government for the privilege of living in this community? I mean, they pave the streets, they have the lights, they have police and fire protection. So you have to pay taxes for the privilege of living here. And she just went bonkers. It's like, what is this? But it just never came up at home, and she didn't learn all that till she got out on her own. And then when she found out she had all these bills to pay, she had some young girls who were looking for a place to live, and she goes, oh, I have a 3-bedroom house. I would be glad to rent you a room. And she started renting her extra bedrooms to some of the girls that worked for her, and voila, she became a little small town homemade apartment manager and had girls paying rent and paying for her house. So she got to live there free. No, she didn't. It wasn't free. She had to do what? Supervise the girls that lived with her and put up with the grief of some of their boyfriends coming over and getting rowdy. And she called me and she said, Dad, 2 of these girls had their boyfriends over and they were wrestling around, and one of them threw the other one against the wall, and there's a big hole in the wall in my living room. What am I going to do? I said, chill out. I'll come over on Saturday and fix it. There's no way you can fix it. It's just caved in. I said, yes, it can be fixed. She said, but then it'll show. I said, no, it won't show. And so I went over there with a piece of sheetrock and some tape and some mud and all the stuff you do, and I put it together and got some matching paint and painted over it, and she was just amazed at stuff that I just took for granted. And I thought, this isn't so bad having a grown daughter. She's learning all this stuff about life, but she's also learning some things that I'm capable of doing that she never knew before because she just didn't pay attention to it. And why did I learn to do stuff like that? Because I'm a teacher. And I don't make very much money. And when I find out what the guy who does that professionally gets paid, I'm thinking I can go to the internet, I can go to a book, I can go somewhere and learn how to do that so I don't have to pay somebody else to do it for me. Okay, number 314. I'm 19 years old and I've struggled with a bad self-concept all my life. I just don't measure up to my own expectations. Now, see, Dr. Dobson's nice about it, but I would just say, well, apparently your expectations are too high. I mean, that's all there is to it. And Dr. Dobson is nicer. He says, someone said comparison is the root of all inferiority, and it's true. When you look at another person's strengths and compare them to your own weaknesses, there's no way to come out feeling good about yourself. Agreed? So what are we doing looking at other people's strengths and looking at our weaknesses? Let's just stop doing this comparison thing. On page 260, Dr. Dodson says, perhaps a wise counselor can help you see that God has designed you for a specific purpose. When that's achieved, comparison with others is no longer an important issue. It doesn't matter. In fact, if we're each a unique individual, then why would we compare ourselves with other people? Let's just be the person that God wants us to be. Let's do what God wants us to do in life, and let's leave everything else up to Him. And just don't compare yourself. I mean, I've enjoyed being a college professor for all these years. But let me tell you something. I have met a whole bunch of other college professors that are way more smarter than I am. I mean, this thing about learning your names. Photographic minds that just look at the pictures and memorize names and faces and have them from day one. And it takes me forever to get this stuff down. By the time I know you well enough to recognize you someplace outside of class, the semester's over and I start all over again. You understand? That's just not one of my strengths. And I have some friends who've just written tons of books. And every time I think about writing a book, I go, why would I write a book? There's somebody else already written one on that subject and it's such a good book. Why do we need an extra one? And besides, if I wrote one, it probably wouldn't be as good as that one, so just keep reading that one. And I keep thinking, if I found a topic that no one else had written about and that we needed some new information out there, I probably would buckle down and write one. But I just find so many books already in existence, and then somebody says, well, but don't you just have an urge to write a book? No. Well, what urge do you have? Let's see. Probably the strongest urge I have in the dead of winter. I just spent the weekend. My grandson came over and we put on a DVD of one of his baseball games from this summer. So probably the greatest urge I have in the dead of winter is to go bass fishing or go watch a grandson play baseball. Now, can you understand? It'd be easier for somebody to say, well, those aren't very noble ambitions. Well, I just don't ooze a lot of noble ambitions. But are you ready for this? I'm a happy camper. I know this is how God wants me to live. I know this is what God wants me to do. So I do it and just recognize that I don't need to compare myself with all those other people. And if you notice, as soon as we start comparing ourselves with others, we just have a natural inclination to compare ourselves with others who are better at something than we are and start to feeling inferior. Just don't go there. Oh, I guess you could say, well, yeah, let's all get together and find people who are inferior to us and let's sit around and make fun of them. Well, that's not healthy either. So it's just don't do that comparison thing. It's just, and when you're working with adolescents and with young adults, don't compare them with other young adults. Just help everybody chart their own course and recognize they're a unique gift to the world from God. Number 321. My boyfriend doesn't talk to me very much. He's just a very quiet and shy person. Will he always be this way? What's the answer, quiet and shy person? He'll get over it when he gets married? Wanna bet. If he's not talking very much now, he probably won't talk very much in the future. I just wish he'd tell me what he's thinking and feeling. Well, if you want him to tell you what he's thinking and feeling, you're going to have to ask him, because shyness and an introverted personality result, at the bottom of page 263, primarily from an inborn temperament that tends to be very persistent throughout life. So if he's kind of shy about talking about himself, he's probably not going to get much better at doing that. You're just going to have to accept him. On the other hand, some people do become more talkative. But may I say this, ladies? If you're thinking about marrying somebody, don't think that you're marrying the person that you hope he becomes. You need to accept the fact that, what is it? You stand in front of all those people and you say, for better or worse, for richer or for poor, in sickness and in health, till death do us part. You're accepting them for what they are. You say, well, I didn't know all this stuff about them. Well, surprise, surprise. Life is full of surprises. You'll just have to deal with that. So try to get as many of your questions answered before you take that big step. Page 264, question 322. I'm the boyfriend who doesn't talk very much. I've been that way all my life. Part of the problem, see, Dr. Dobson used to talk about these questions on his radio program. So what happened is this girl wrote in a thing, and then he talks about it on the air, and then the guy gets on and says, hey, I'm the boyfriend. And I've been that way all my life. Part of the problem is that I just don't like to reveal what I'm feeling. So I'm reluctant to share my feelings. So that means when she says, so tell me what you're feeling, he's go, I would rather not. And don't take it personal. He would rather not share his feelings with anybody. Now, can you see where a girl who wants to hear those feelings is probably going to share her feelings a lot with him? Can you see where if he lives long enough, if his best friend, that's what I refer to my wife as, she's my best friend. If my best friend is always sharing things, can you see where with time I'm going to be more inclined to share some of my thoughts and feelings? So there can be some change in that area, but don't be going into marriage thinking, I'm going to fix this guy and he'll be okay. But part of the problem is I just don't like to reveal what I'm feeling. But also, I don't know how to talk to people. I get really uncomfortable when I'm with people and I'm expected to say things. Can you give me some hints about how to express myself? And here's what he says at the bottom of page 264. As for your relationship with your future wife, she'll need to know how you feel about her. If you don't talk about anything else, at least talk about how you feel about her. You have to do that if you're going to be married. About what you dream about, things that upset you, things that bother you. Well, I would say this, Dr. Dobson, when he starts sharing with his wife things that bother him, he better be ready to hear this. That bothers you? Something that small bothers you? And then I put my shoes on the bed. Why? Well, they're up high enough where I can reach them. And my wife comes in and sees my shoes on the bed, and she goes, don't put your shoes on the bed. And what do I say? That bothers you? Some little thing like that? And you understand? What's a big thing to me is a little thing to her. What's a big thing to her is a little thing to me. And that's when you start laughing once in a while in a relationship and realizing that, surprise, surprise, we just got surprised by something. But you're going to have to share your feelings. You're going to have to tell her how you feel about some of your dreams, about things that upset you, what you'd like her to do. Now, be careful. I grew up in a home where I had to, on a routinely basis, do the dishes. So I have a preferred way of washing dishes and rinsing them and drying them and putting them away. And my wife has a completely different procedure for doing the very same thing. And one time I shared with her how I thought dishes ought to be washed and rinsed and dried and put away. And she just didn't see it. So, since we had two daughters, any idea what I said? Girls, you need to help your mother by doing the dishes, and I'll show you how to do it. So I taught them my way of doing dishes. And my wife didn't care as long as they did them. Then when the girls were grown and gone, now it's back to just the two of us again. And finally I said, Nina, you know what? I'm not going to get over some of these feelings I have, but let's just make an agreement. If I don't like the way you do something, I should probably do it myself without talking about it. And that street goes both ways, right? And if you don't like my shoes on the bed, then you could just do something about it. Well, let me tell you what happens. If I leave my shoes someplace where my wife doesn't like them, when I am gone during the day, she puts them away. And the places that she thinks shoes should be put are places where I can never find them. So I concluded I can make my life go easier if I put my shoes in a neutral place where she's not going to feel like she has to move them. Then I'll know where they are the next time I go looking for them. But you just have to work some things out. You just have to say, hey, we're going to work at this thing and make it work. But guys, if you don't want to tell a woman how you feel about her, then you shouldn't ask her to marry you. Because if you ask her to be your wife, you should spend the rest of your life telling her how you feel about her, how much you value her, how important she is to you, and all that good stuff. She just wants to hear it. So when he says, that's just how I am, girls, if the guy says, that's too bad, that's just how I am, what is he really telling you? That if you're going to be my life partner, you're going to have to just take me just as I am. Well, isn't that the way God takes us? Yeah, but once God takes us, what does he do? He starts changing our lives. And early on in our marriage, when my wife and I would go do some husband-wife retreats, and she would talk to the women and I'd talk to the men, and some of them would say, they'd ask her, so how do you and your husband work this stuff out when you have differences? And she said, well, we talk to God about it. And that's what I told the guys, the same thing. In fact, I said to some of the guys, if there's something your wife does that bothers you and you talk to her about it all the time, then she's well aware of how you feel. Maybe it's time to quit sharing your feelings with her and just start talking to God about it. And she told some of the wives the same kind of thing. And she also said, and by the way, when my husband quits, what's the word we use for when you talk to someone about something that they don't want to hear over and over and over again? Is that called nagging? Mm-hmm. Yeah. When someone stops nagging, then my wife said, I know Tom was going to talk to somebody about it, and I knew he wasn't the kind of personality to talk to his friends, so he must be talking to God. And if he's talking to God about it, maybe I better think about it from God's perspective. And by the way, when I was talking to God about it, the issue that bothered me so much, when you talk to God about your life partner, all of a sudden you start to get more of God's perspective, and the thing that bothered you starts to kind of shrivel up and become smaller and smaller. It's just amazing how to have. I mean, have any of you ever had a friend who just started to irritate you, and you start talking to God about the irritation, and for some reason the irritation seems to get smaller and smaller? I'm just telling you, talking to God about this stuff is really the way to go. But listen, if either one of you, if a guy meets a girl and says, I think I'd like to marry her someday, but there's a couple of things about you that concern me. Well, too bad for you, that's just the way I am. You better ask yourself, do I want to live with that characteristic for the rest of my life? Not that they can't change, but it's that you might have to live that way. Okay, question 3. Where did I go? 329. On page 270. I believe God is calling me to be a youth pastor when I get out of college, but I'm concerned about how I can do that financially. Pastors don't make very much money, and if I have a family, I'm not sure I could support them in that profession. And I love what Dr. Dobson says. Just continue to walk in the light you've been given and leave the future in God's hands. If He is calling you to do a job, He will make it possible for you to care for your family and overcome any other barriers to that responsibility. Now, here's a guy who went to medical school and got a doctor's degree. Okay, so he worked in a medical profession. I can tell you, I have some friends who work in the medical profession. They make plenty of money to pay the bills. And I'm glad he told this guy, because there are some people who have actually said in Christian communities, said, well, you need to get a job that'll pay the bills. When in fact, I say, and I like what Dr. Dobson says here, you do what God wants you to do, you follow God's leading in your life, you follow your passion, and let God figure out how to pay the bills. And I could tell you stories. My wife said one time, we should probably write a book. I said, no, Nina, if we wrote a book on all the way God has used to pay the bills for us to spend our lives in Christian schoolwork, it would make people who make more money mad because it seems like God's playing favorites. And all the people who live like we do already know it. They don't need to read a book on it. I said, we just need to be thankful to God for what He's done. But when we had 2 young girls that needed school clothes on a regular basis, there were a series of stores here in Kansas City called Sears Surplus. Have any of you ever heard of that? Okay, they don't exist anymore. But we used to go to Sears Surplus to buy all of our clothing. In fact, bought furniture, bought all kinds of stuff there, and you could buy stuff for maybe 20 cents on the dollar. I mean, if something cost $100 at the Sears store in the mall, it would cost $20 at the surplus store. Then when all the surplus stores closed, I don't know why, I found out that Sears started putting racks in their regular stores where they sold that stuff that they used to sell in the surplus store. So then we started going to the regular Sears stores and finding those racks where they had clearance stuff. And by the way, when Walmart first started, Sam Walton knew about Sears and other merchandising people, so he always had a rack in his store where he had clearance stuff. So you used to be able to go into Walmart and find a $5 shirt for $1 or 75 cents. Not anymore. The clearance rack at Walmart now, since Sam Walton's gone and his kids took over, the clearance shelves at Walmart, they sell a $5 item for $4. That is not clearance. That's just marking it down. But they do that. I don't know what they do with the stuff when it doesn't sell, but I'm just telling you that God provided all these ways for us to find bargains. And when all of these clearance racks disappeared, and our children were out of school, so we didn't have to take care of them anymore, it's just my wife and I, and we go shopping for clothes and can't believe what they want for them, we discovered a new place to shop. Where do I do most of my shopping now?
Salvation.
Thrift stores. Specifically, we probably buy most of our stuff at the Red Rack thrift store. It used to be called Disabled American Veterans, and when I told students I went there, they go, Dr. Bonine, you're not a disabled veteran. I said, it's not made for those people to shop there. The money they make, they use to support disabled veterans. And we discovered thrift stores. And then we discovered that after church on Sunday, we can drive out to the Red Rack thrift store, and they have, I don't know what tag it'll be next Sunday, and I didn't go this last Sunday, but that, let's say it's the white tag. So if that Sunday is white tag, everything that's white tag will be 50 cents. So if I need a shirt or a pair of slacks, I just go in there and look for my size and look for the one with a white tag on it and pick it up and pay 50 cents and I'm on my way. I've actually paid 50 cents for bicycles, for winter coats. I have one of those big old football parkas at home that I paid 50 cents for at a thrift store. You go, what? It doesn't say Kansas City Chiefs. It says Oakland Raiders on it. That's why it was in the thrift store, and that's why nobody bought it. I didn't buy it to wear to a football game. I bought it to wear in the dead of winter when I have to go out and shovel snow. And who's looking to see if I'm wearing an Oakland Raiders jacket? If it bothered my neighbor, I'd probably just get some paint and paint over it, or get some stuff and pull the markings off of it and do what I could to change it. But I'm just telling you, God provides. God just makes provision. Just do what God wants you to do and let Him take care of things. Okay, that's 329. Let's go over to number 338. Over on page 279. I'm 21 years old and I still haven't figured out what I want to do with my life. Well, when I was 21, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with my life either. I know I need to choose a profession. See, I never felt that pressure to choose a profession. I don't know why, I just never did. But I can't seem to get a fix on what makes sense for me. How can I find an achievable goal and begin moving toward it? And here's what Dr. Dobson says. Selecting an occupation and training for it can be a very difficult assignment. Because, see, he was a medical doctor. So you have to make that decision pretty early in life. It's tough to predict what you'll want to be doing when you're 50 or 60 years old. I doubt if you can predict what you'll want to be doing when you're 50 or 60 years old. Yet you're obligated to guess. You have to base your decision on very limited information. You may not even know what the work will be like then. Yet you enroll yourself in an academic program and seek ways to train for it. And here's what I say. Just follow God's leading. When I came to Calvary as a new Christian, I came here to grow spiritually. And I looked at all the majors they had, and I just said, you know, and this is the way my mind was working. I don't know which major to pick, but the guy who led me to Christ was a pastor. So I'm thinking that sounds like a good major. So I just enrolled in the pastor's program. I studied to be a pastor. God didn't call me to be a full-time pastor. He called me to be a teacher. And when I was teaching in a Christian school, teaching Bible and math, one time early in my career, my superintendent came to me and he said, Tom, he said, I figured out what makes you such a good Bible teacher in our Christian school. And I said, what? And he said, you pastor these guys. He said, you kind of see yourself as an assistant pastor to all the pastors in town when their kids come to our school. Now, where did that mindset come from? Being a pastor's major in college. And I realized that God had prepared me for this ministry by having me take a major in college that didn't, I mean, if I would have known I was going to be a teacher, what would I have probably picked for my major in college? Education. But God had something else in store for me, so He didn't let me know what I was going to do. He moved me in the direction of taking pastoral studies, and wouldn't you know, while I'm teaching in a Christian school, how did I often supplement my income? By preaching on weekends and being an interim pastor in small churches while they were between hiring pastors. And I thought, whoa, this preparation that God gave me was actually part of His preparation for me to continue to be a Christian school teacher all my life. And when I look back, I think, isn't that cool the way God puts it all together? Well, if it's cool the way God puts it all together, then what do you figure? Up front, the coolest thing you can do is just let God put it all together. Just follow Him and let Him direct your life. Isn't there a proverb that says something like that? Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Just find some of those proverbs. And by the way, the guy who led me to Christ did me a real favor. He said, Tom, he said, if you want to be a wise young Christian as quickly as possible, read a proverb a day every day of your life. And that means you read through the book of Proverbs every month, because there's 31 of them. And I started doing that. And it was just amazing how many of those proverbs gave me a sense of direction in life early on, before I even knew what was going on. And then I realized, you know, even when you know what's going on, you still go back and live by Proverbs. So just keep saying, it's not so much me choosing a vocation or a profession, it's me asking God to direct my choices, to make the kind of choices that are pleasing to Him, knowing that He'll put the whole package together and make me the person that He wants me to be and prepare me for the ministry He has for me down the road. 338. That's the one we just looked at. So let's go over to 343. What's this one all about? Still talking about advice to young adults. I have plenty of reasons to resent my parents. On page 286. They've never abused me or anything like that, but they do such stupid things. Are you ready for this? This is so scary. if you remember stupid things your parents did, guess what's going to happen the longer you live? The more you're going to see yourself doing some of those same stupid things. No, you say, no, I'm just telling you that sometimes the person who says, I can't believe my parents do such stupid things. And then I say, so what kind of stupid things are they doing? Then when they tell me, I go, well, that's interesting because you kind of do the same thing. You go, what? No way. I'm just telling you, you pick this stuff up. It's almost like if you focus on something they're doing that you don't like, your focus on it starts to make it a part of your own life. My dad's work has been the only thing he cared about. Now see, there it is, overgeneralization again. It's not the only thing he cared about, or you would have starved to death. He obviously cared about you enough to keep you alive where you can complain about the way he raised you. My mom's a perpetual nagger. Well, she wouldn't have to nag if you would do things to make her happy. Well, I don't want to do that. I just want to do my own thing. Well, there you go. How can I respect people like that? And Dr. Dobson says he's kind of nice to the guy. I would say what I'm wondering is how come your parents respect you enough to let you still live there? Anybody who talks that way about his parents, I'm thinking I ought to call your parents and tell them to kick you out of the house. Send you on your way if you don't like it. But Dr. Dobson's nice about it. He says, I urge you to cut them some slack. First, because the scripture commands children to respect their parents. It says nothing about whether or not they're worthy of respect. And second, because you'll learn someday just how hard it is to be a good parent. Even those who are highly motivated to do the job right often make a mess of things. And guess what? His criticism of his parents, if he keeps criticizing his parents that way and he someday has children, what will his children someday be doing? Criticizing him for the very things he criticized his parents for. You better just get over it somewhere. And obviously this guy is living in a small box, self-centered box, isn't he? He's just thinking about himself and nobody else. And then Dr. Dobson says, let me share one more suggestion with you and with others who've been angry at their parents. Given the brevity of life and the temporary nature of all human relationships, can you find it within your hearts to forgive them? What does God's word say about forgiveness? Our Father, what is that prayer? We call it the Lord's Prayer, but it's really the prayer he gave us to pray. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we do what? Forgive others who trespass against us. Question 349. Page 292. How can parents prepare their young children for the assault on self-esteem? Now we're in a new chapter, building self-confidence in children and teens. How can parents prepare their young children for the assault on self-esteem that's almost certain to come in adolescence? Well, I like his suggestions. Your children can benefit from learning something that will serve as a centerpiece of their self-concept during the difficult years. When I read that, one of our daughters, our oldest daughter, her teacher in her grade school classroom said, you're such a good reader. We have a young boy in class who's dyslexic pretty severely. He can't read. Would you be willing to read all of his textbooks onto a tape recorder so he could listen to the textbooks and he wouldn't have to read it? And so she did that. And I used to love to sit at home and listen to her reading the textbooks into this little recorder. It was just so cool. And so I thought, you know what? That could be the centerpiece of her self-concept. And one day, when she was, I think, getting a little older, she said, we're going to have a talent contest at school. Our teacher has said we're going to have one. And she said, I don't have any talents. And I said, sure you do. She said, what? I said, reading. She said, reading is not a talent. I said, so what what do you think is a talent? I said, yes, it is. And she said, no, it isn't. So I thought, there's no sense arguing about it. I think it's a talent. She think it isn't. So I said, so what do you consider to be a talent? And she said, well, like playing a piano or a musical instrument or singing or something. I'm going, so do you have a musical instrument you want to play? That you want to learn to play, so at the end of the school year when you have a talent contest you can play your musical instrument? And she goes, yes, just like that. I go, what? And she said, a piano. Why couldn't she have picked a flute or something that you could buy for $300?
You don't want someone practicing the flute.
Well, in fact, our second daughter took up flute. And I thought, well, it doesn't cost as much as a piano.
It costs your ears.
Yeah,
so.
but it can sure mess with your head with someone blowing through that thing without making real music. But find something that can be their centerpiece. And he says things like basketball, tennis, electronics, art, music, whatever. Okay, it happens that when our daughter got to adolescence and she could play the piano, and she knew she was good in school, so she had a lot going for her, but she went to a school where athletics was a big thing. And fortunately for her, she was tall, so they put her on defense. They put her in center to play there to block shots, and she'd put her hands up and block shots, and she was good at doing that. But when they would go to the other end, they would have her move back and forth across the lane, and so when they would pass her the ball, and all these girls would stand around her, and they would rattle her, so she'd get nervous and let the ball go, and they would get it and steal it from her. And she came home, she said, Dad, I'm such a failure. I said, no, you're not. I said, you just haven't learned some of the tricks of basketball. And she goes, what's that? I said, okay, here's the deal, girl. That when they pass you the ball and you're surrounded by 3 players, all you have to do is pivot and throw the ball to basket. That's all you do. You're not even trying to make a shot. Just pivot and throw the ball up, and they'll blow the whistle. The referees for a girls' game will do that. They'll blow the whistle, and what will they say? They'll pick one of those 3 girls and say, you fouled her. I said, then they all have to stand back while you stand at the free throw line and get 2 shots to make the same 2 points. So I said, what that means is you just spend your whole day practicing shooting free throws. So when in a game, you're at the free throw line, you make the 2 shots, so it's the same as making 2 points. And she started working on that. And for the longest time, her name was on the wall in the gymnasium. She set the record for the number of points scored shooting free throws. You understand? That became what Dr. Dobson calls like a centerpiece. And you just need to help people develop those. You need to find out what your child's strengths are, or if you're working with adolescents, find out what some of their strengths are and help give them some skills where they can have something that they can lean on, so that, it does 2 things. One is it gives them something that they know they're good at if people criticize them. But the other thing is, when you're an adolescent, if you're good at something and people applaud you, then people aren't as prone to criticize you. They tend to kind of want to be your friend. So just help children develop and hone their skills so they can compensate for some of the criticism that's going to come their way during those adolescent years. Okay, that's number 349. Let's jump over here to 350. No, 352. Our 15-year-old daughter is getting some rough treatment at the hands of her peers these days. She wasn't invited to a party. She cried herself to sleep. It's just tearing me up to see her hurt like this. Will this experience leave lifelong scars on her mind? I remember the first time one of our daughters came home from school and said, Dad, one of the girls at our school is having a party and she didn't invite me. I said, did she invite everybody in class? And she said, no. She only invited like 3 of the girls in the class, and all the rest of us are left out. I said, aha, what should all the left out girls do?
Have a party.
Have a party. And guess where they should have that party? At our house. And they were going to this girl's house for just a party for the night. So how can we up the ante and make the left out girls have a better party? A sleepover where they get to spend the night. What do you think? And all of a sudden, the girl who was being a little, what's the word, snobbish about it, and left all of the girls in the class out, all the girls who got left out came to our house and had a better party. And the next week at school, when they're talking about what they did over the weekend, and they're all at the time, they said, oh, we went to the Bonines' house and had a sleepover and da-da-da-da, talked about all the fun they had. And these kids who went to the snobbish girls' party said, well, we went to a party too. It's like, oh, that's good, that's fun. But, you know, it's like they're so excited. So they're not going around feeling moping all week long about, we got left out. And to me, that becomes the job of the parents and adults to be tuned in to say, wait a minute, we can take care of this. And I'm thankful that my wife is the kind of person who says, it's okay to plan this party at the last minute. We don't have to have weeks to get ready for it. We'll just do it because we're doing it for the kids.
But, I mean, there are times where you just have to know that, like, life isn't fair, right? Like, you may not get invited to something in that case, and it's okay. And it may not have even been an offense or anything. Like,
that's
you just
exactly
kinda have
right.
to get over it.
And the reason, and I would say that's the talk to have. If the girl hadn't have cried herself to sleep at night, I mean, I don't know why this girl is so traumatized by it, but the level of trauma tells me that we're going to compensate. But you're right, Karis, that if it's just, you say, hey, I didn't get invited. It's like, well, how do you feel about that? Well, I probably just wouldn't want to have any fun if I was there anyway, because they're kind of snobbish girls, you know, they're kind of a clique. And I said, well, okay, so then why don't we go do something that would be fun for you while they're at their party, and then you won't be thinking about it. So do you understand? It's just like the level of compensation has to do with how traumatic the experience is. But you're right. We all have to learn eventually, don't we, that we get left out of some things. And here's where my wife says that there's something wrong with me. I enjoy being left out. I don't like social occasions. Never have, never will. I don't even like family reunions. Never have, never will. I'm just a shy, lonely, lonesome, a loner. That's my basic personality. And I use up all of my social stuff being a teacher. So when I step out of the classroom, I just want to go home and have some down alone time without all that drama. And it's just personality stuff. And he says here, our task as parents on page 294 is not to eliminate every challenge for our children, but to serve as a confident ally on their behalf, encouraging them when they're distressed, intervening when the threats are overwhelming, and above all, giving them the tools they need to overcome obstacles. Okay, 360. No. 362. Some of these I want to talk about, but we just don't have enough time. Can boys and girls on page 360, on page 300, can boys and girls be taught to treat each other with respect? That seems like a tough assignment. Why would teaching people to respect each other be a tough assignment?
It's not in our nature.
It's not in our nature. It's not a natural thing we do. That's why God gives us so much instruction about how to treat one another, because we wouldn't have figured it out on our own. So with God's directives in mind, guess what? All I say is when somebody is just doing the old carnal, natural thing, I say, so what does God think about what you're doing? I don't know. Well, let's see if we can find a Bible verse. And I try to find one and have them read it and say, what does that verse say about the way you should treat other people? And one time I had a guy say, we're looking at do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Would you want people to treat you that way? He said, I don't care. I said, now, say that again. I said, you just came into class and made fun of somebody, and you said you don't care if people treat you that way? He said, no, I don't care. I gave the whole class an assignment. I mean, it hasn't happened very often, but what assignment? I mean, he seemed to be sincere. He wasn't just messing with me. So I thought, if he really sincerely doesn't care if people make fun of him, then maybe I'll just have everybody in the room think of some insulting thing to say to him, and then write it on a piece of paper and give it to him and see what he thinks about it. Any idea what happened? He didn't like it. And you know what I discovered? He hadn't had people say things, mean things to him before, because he was a big bruiser kind of guy with a lot of athletic ability, so nobody said anything to him. So he thought he didn't care because it never happened. Then when I had people write anonymous notes and give it to him, he said, oh, I guess it does hurt. I said, there you go. There's no guessing about it. Words hurt. Sticks and stones can break my bones, but what? Words can, does that say sticks and stones can break my bones and words can never hurt me? Is that what that says? It's a lie. It's just a lie. It's not true. And you have to teach kids how to treat each other with respect. And sometimes I've even made students who didn't like each other come to class. I actually had two girls. I said, why do you girls not like each other? And they're just going on. I said, well, wait a minute. I said, where do you go to church? And I found out they both go to the same church. And I found out their families were good friends. And I'm going, whoa, what's this all about? I said, guess what? Every morning when you come to school, the first thing you do when you walk in the door is you come to my classroom and you say, hi, Mr. Bonine. And I'm here to say something nice to so-and-so. And they would come to my classroom and have to say something nice to each other. And then when they came to my class later in the day, I'd make them say something nice again. At the end of the day, and when I caught them at lunch, I'd say something nice to each other again. And when they first did it, it was like, you know, and they're saying something nice, just saying words. But I'm telling you, those words were so significant. After a while, they started being nicer to each other. I just told them, you're just going to be nice to each other when you come to school because I'm going to make you be nice to each other. I'm going to make you say nice things. Well, I don't mean it. Well, shame on you for not meaning it, because you should. And then after they say nice things for a while, they actually start meaning it. So I think you just have to say, hey, it's natural to be disrespectful. We're going to teach them how to respect each other. And we're not going to tolerate disrespect. Okay, that was 362. Let's go to 372. Good. Making marriage work. Now maybe I need to skip over this. We'll see what happens when class ends today. And I'm on page 309, and what I have to cover, see if I have enough time to cover the rest of this book in the next two class periods. But this says, but see, I mean, you're not married yet. So reading on making marriage work, probably the best thing you can do with this chapter is read through it and make some notes that you're going to use for future reference. But it says, I'm engaged to a beautiful and godly young lady. Spending the rest of my life with her is more than I could have hoped or dreamed for. But the possibility of divorce scares me. What can we do to avoid this tragedy? And Dr. Dobson basically says the first thing it's to do is the establishment of a Christ-centered home. When newlyweds are deeply committed to Jesus Christ, they enjoy many advantages over families with no spiritual dimension. The second is commit your home, your relationship, your future children, and your entire lives to God's purpose. What is God's purpose for the family? The second dimension on page 310 to a Christ-centered home is a regular time set aside to study the scriptures and apply them to everyday life. Reading the Bible together as a family gives us a window into the mind of God. Marriage and parenthood were God's idea, and He's told us how to live together in peace and harmony. A Christ-centered relationship is the ground floor of a stable family. If you and your fiance build your marriage on that solid foundation, you will not face the bitter fruit of divorce, so go for it. My wife and I will be waiting for you at the finish line. I thought that was neat, the way Dr. Dobson says that. So basically, if you want to avoid all this stuff that's going on in our culture, start out by saying, we're going to build our relationship on Christian foundations, which probably means that your first few dates would be going to church. And then your conversations would be talking about spiritual things. And you would make Christ the center of what you're doing. I just tell you guys something. I married this wonderful girl I met here at Calvary. And since I got saved at 18, I wasn't sure just what to do, how to relate to Christian girls. So when I picked her up for our first date where we were going to church, I said, you know, Nina, I'm not sure. I looked at the Bible to see if I could find some directives on dating, and I couldn't find much. But I think it would be a good idea if we just start out by having a word of prayer. And right there in my car, I just bowed my head and prayed that God would give us a good time and help us stay safe and live our lives in a way that's pleasing to Him. And I didn't even think anything about it. Then I just started the car and we went on to church. And later, she got saved when she was 13. So she had gone through Youth for Christ and dated a lot of teenage Christian guys. And later, after we got married, she said, you know, Tom, you did something that none of my other Christian dates ever did. And I said, what was that? I'm thinking, pulled up in my red 55 Chevrolet to pick her up, you know. And she goes, you prayed before we left on our first date, and then the first conversation we had was you said, let's share our testimonies. So I'm just telling you guys, if you want to get a keeper who's got a heart for God, just start out making God the center of this whole thing going on. Okay, we'll stop there and pick up with that on Wednesday.